3 months after the great battle at Earth, the galaxy looked completely different. Kyle Morrison walked through the same crystal halls, where he had once felt so small and powerless, but now he carried himself with the confidence of a representative from the strongest military force in known space. The Galactic Council building still gleamed with alien technology, but the beings who moved through it no longer seemed so impressive. The council chambers had been transformed into something humanity had never expected to see. Instead of 12 arrogant rulers deciding the fate of lesser species, there were now dozens of representatives from worlds that had been liberated by human fleets. The old order where might made right had been replaced by something unprecedented. In galactic history, Admiral Lisa Kane stood beside Kyle as they entered the main assembly hall. Her uniform now bore the insignia of the Galactic Liberation Command, and her confidence reflected the reality that human forces controlled most of the former Council territory. The liberation had been swift and decisive as species after species welcomed Earth's forces as protectors rather than conquerors. The former Council races sat in a special section reserved for those who had surrendered after the battle at Earth. Some, like the Zeftari, had quickly offered to join humanity's growing alliance. Others remained defiant but powerless, as their own populations called for new governments that would not lead them into suicidal wars. Captain Amy Rodriguez, now promoted to admiral, reported on the status of liberation operations throughout the galaxy. Her forces had freed over 60 worlds in the past 3 months, and more planets were requesting human protection every day. The speed of the Council's collapse had surprised even Earth's military planners. The most dramatic change was psychological, rather than military. For thousands of years, species throughout the galaxy had believed that resistance to overwhelming force was impossible. The Council had seemed so powerful, and their technology so advanced that challenging them was considered insane. Humanity had proven that determination and proper preparation could overcome any advantage. Dr. Elena Foster addressed the assembly explaining humanity's terms for lasting peace. Earth would guarantee the independence of every species that wanted freedom, but any return to the old ways of conquest and slavery would face the full power of human military forces. The 10 armadas that had terrified the Council now patrolled space as guardians of liberty. What made humanity's victory even more remarkable was how they chose to use their newfound power. Instead of becoming conquerors themselves, humans offered genuine partnership to the species they liberated. Former slaves became equals in a growing alliance based on cooperation rather than domination. The liberated populations welcomed this approach because they had lived under Council oppression for generations. They knew the difference between protectors and masters. Human forces provided security and technology, but did not demand tribute or obedience. For the first time in galactic history, a powerful species was offering friendship instead of subjugation. Commander Rachel Kim oversaw the establishment of new governments on former Council worlds. The process was complex because many species had forgotten how to govern themselves after centuries of alien rule. Human advisors helped establish democratic institutions while carefully avoiding any attempt to impose Earth's political systems on other cultures. Chief Engineer Tony Martinez led teams that were sharing human technology with allied species. The weapons and defensive systems that had defeated the Council were being adapted for use by former slaves who wanted to defend their newly won freedom. For the first time in thousands of years, weaker species had access to advanced military technology. The economic transformation was just as dramatic as the political changes. Under Council rule, entire civilizations had existed solely to provide resources and labor for their alien masters. Now those same worlds were developing their own industries and trading freely with Earth and each other. Admiral Susan Clark reported that several former Council species had requested membership in Humanity's Alliance. The process required careful evaluation because Earth wanted genuine partners, not opportunistic converts. Species that had enthusiastically supported Council oppression could not be trusted with the responsibilities of Alliance membership. The most satisfying development was the fate of the Council leadership. Chancellor Vexathara remained imprisoned on her homeworld, where her own people had risen up against the government that had led them to catastrophic defeat. Other council leaders faced similar situations as their populations demanded accountability. For decades of failed policies, Admiral Frank Lopez coordinated security for the new galactic government. Human fleets maintained patrol routes throughout former council space, but their presence was welcomed rather than feared. The ships that had once been symbols of human resistance were now guardians of peace for hundreds of worlds. The transformation was not without challenges. Some species struggled to adapt to freedom after generations of slavery. Others had difficulty believing that humans would not eventually become as oppressive as their former masters. It would take time to build the trust necessary for a truly stable galactic community. Admiral Patricia Wells addressed the assembly from Earth via holographic projection. She explained that humanity's greatest victory was not the defeat of the Council fleets, but the transformation of the galaxy from an empire of fear into a community of hope. The weapons that had won the war were less important than the principles that would win the peace. The most dramatic moment came when Wells announced that Earth was formally dissolving the old Galactic Council and replacing it with a new organization, based on equality and mutual respect. Every species would have a voice regardless of their military power or technological advancement. Decisions would be made through discussion and compromise, rather than threats and violence. Former War Marshal Thekvar, now serving as a liaison for his defeated people, stood to address the assembly. He acknowledged that the Council had been wrong to threaten humanity and admitted that his species had much to learn about coexistence. His words carried weight because everyone knew he had been one of the Council's most effective military commanders. As the session continued, representatives from dozens of worlds spoke about their hopes for the future. Species that had been enemies for centuries were discussing trade agreements and cultural exchanges. The fear that had dominated galactic politics for millennia was being replaced by genuine cooperation. Kyle Morrison looked around the assembly hall and marveled at how much had changed. The same building that had once housed humanity's oppressors now served as a symbol of liberation for the entire galaxy. The crystal walls that had seemed so intimidating now reflected the light of freedom. The most important change was harder to see but more significant than all the others. Throughout the galaxy, beings who had lived their entire lives in fear were learning to hope. Children who had been born into slavery were growing up free. Worlds that had existed only to serve. Alien masters were becoming partners in building a better future. Admiral Wells concluded her address by revealing humanity's ultimate secret. Earth could have conquered the galaxy just as easily as the Council once had. Human military technology was now superior to anything else in space, and Earth's fleets could have imposed their will on every other species. Instead, humanity chose to offer something the galaxy had never known before. The choice was freedom instead of slavery, cooperation instead of conquest, and hope instead of fear. The aliens who had once laughed at human weakness now understood that true strength came not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the wisdom to create friends. Humanity had not just won a war, they had won the right to build a better galaxy for everyone. The largest invasion fleet in galactic history approached Earth with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. 3,000 warships from all 12 Council races formed a massive armada that stretched across space like a metal continent. Chancellor Vexithara commanded from her flagship, a vessel so large it had its own gravity and weather systems. She had assembled this force to make humanity an example that would terrify every other species in the galaxy. After the embarrassing defeat at New Boston, the Council's reputation needed to be restored with overwhelming violence. Earth would burn, and every living thing in human space would die screaming. What the Chancellor found when her fleet reached. Earth was not a desperate species preparing for extinction. Instead, 10 human armadas waited in perfect formation around their home world. The ships that had seemed so impressive at New Boston were revealed to be just 1/10 of humanity's true military power. Admiral Patricia Wells coordinated Earth's defense from the massive orbital command station that had been built in secret over the past decade. Her flagship was surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of every ship in both fleets. The scale of the battle about to begin was beyond anything in recorded history. Wells opened a communication channel to the Council fleet, and Chancellor Vexithara's alien face appeared on the screen. The Chancellor's expression showed surprise and anger as she realized the humans had been deceiving the Council for years. Her voice carried rage when she demanded an explanation for the secret fleets. Wells smiled and explained that humanity had simply been preparing for this day. Earth had known from the beginning that the Council would never accept an independent human civilization. The only choice was to surrender or be ready to fight. Humanity had chosen to fight. The battle began when Vexithara cut the communication and ordered her ships to attack. 3,000 Council vessels moved forward, expecting to crush the human defenses through sheer numbers and firepower. What they encountered instead was the most sophisticated military machine ever created by any species. Admiral Chris Anderson led the First Fleet in a direct assault on the Council's leading elements. His ships moved with precision that seemed impossible for such large formations. Every vessel knew exactly where it needed to be and when. Council commanders watched in amazement as human fleets executed complex maneuvers without any visible communication. The Second Fleet under Admiral Jennifer Bell attacked from the flanks using electronic warfare to blind Council sensors and disrupt their communications. Human hackers who had spent years studying alien technology turned the Council's own systems against them. Missiles targeted friendly ships and shield generators shut down at critical moments. Admiral Paul Scott's Third Fleet specialized in psychological warfare, and their tactics were unlike anything the Council had ever faced. Human ships broadcast. The screams of dying aliens from previous battles across all communication frequencies. The sounds of Council defeats at New Boston played constantly, making it impossible for alien crews to concentrate. Captain Diana Ward led bomber squadrons that penetrated Council shield systems using frequency rotation techniques developed specifically for this battle. Her pilots had trained for years to fly in perfect coordination through the gaps between shield harmonics. Council ships that had never been touched by enemy fire found themselves taking direct hits to their hulls. The Council's numerical advantage began to disappear as human ships proved far more effective than their size suggested. Major Alex Turner coordinated marine assaults that captured alien vessels intact. Human soldiers in advanced armor stormed through Council ships, turning their own weapons against nearby targets. What terrified the Council commanders most was the coordination between human fleets. They were not fighting 10 separate forces, but 10 arms of a single unified military organization. Information flowed instantly between all ships. Battle plans adapted in real time as conditions changed. Human admirals anticipated council moves before the aliens made them. War Marshal Thekvar found himself commanding a council battle group that was being systematically destroyed by human forces. The same tactics that had worked for him at New Boston were now being used against his own ships. Human vessels appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished before his gunners could respond. Commander Lisa Hayes used her knowledge of council psychology to maximum effect. Her ships would retreat just far enough to make alien commanders overconfident, then spring carefully prepared traps. Council ships chasing what they thought were fleeing humans found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. The She. Battle reached its turning point when Admiral Wells personally led a strike force against Chancellor Vexithara's flagship. The massive council vessel was supposed to be invulnerable with shields that could stop anything and weapons that could destroy planets. Human ships proved that no defense was perfect if you knew how to attack it. Wells brought her ship the USS Constitution alongside the alien flagship, and her Marines began cutting through the hull with weapons designed specifically for this purpose. The Chancellor watched in horror as human soldiers poured into her vessel and began taking control of critical systems. Fighting spread throughout the massive ship as human forces systematically captured deck after deck. The aliens had never faced boarding actions because no species had ever been desperate enough to try ramming techniques against council shields. Humans had spent years developing equipment and tactics for exactly this situation. The capture of the Chancellor's flagship sent shock waves through the entire Council fleet. Their most powerful vessel and their supreme commander were in human hands. Morale collapsed as alien crews realized that their supposedly invincible technology could be defeated by human determination and superior tactics. Council ships began surrendering or fleeing as their formations fell apart. What had started as a confident assault on a weak enemy became a desperate retreat from a military force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human fleets pursued the fleeing aliens, destroying those who continued to fight and accepting the surrender of those who gave up. When the battle ended, Admiral Wells stood on the bridge of the captured Council flagship with Chancellor Vexithara as her prisoner. The alien leader who had threatened to destroy humanity was now completely at human mercy. Outside the viewports, the wreckage of the Council's great invasion fleet drifted in space around Earth. Wells looked at the defeated Chancellor and explained that this battle could have been avoided. Humanity had never wanted war with the Council. All they had asked for was the right to exist as an independent species. The Council's arrogance and cruelty had forced Earth to become something the galaxy had never seen before. The captured alien technology would be studied, and the Council's remaining forces would face human fleets equipped with even more advanced weapons. The age of Council dominance was over, and a new chapter in galactic history was about to begin. Humanity had not just survived the Council's attempt at genocide, they had turned it into their own victory. Vexithara looked at the human admiral with something that might have been respect. She had underestimated this species, and the mistake had cost her everything. The Council had ruled through fear for thousands of years, but now there was something in the galaxy that was more dangerous than they were. As news of the battle spread, throughout Council space rebellion began on worlds that had been enslaved for centuries. Species that had accepted their fate suddenly saw that resistance was possible. The humans had done what no one thought could be done, and the galaxy would never be the same. Dr. Elena Foster stood in the deepest underground facility on Earth and watched 20 years of secret work finally come to light. the Lazarus Protocol had been humanity's greatest achievement and its most carefully guarded secret. Now, with war declared against the Galactic Council, it was time to reveal what Earth had really been doing since first contact with alien civilizations. The briefing room was filled with the most important people on Earth: military leaders, government officials, and scientists who had all played a part in the massive deception. On the screens around the room were real-time displays of 10 human fleets moving through space toward Council territory. Each fleet was exactly as large and powerful as the one that had just won at New Boston. Elena remembered the day everything changed. It was 20 years ago when Colonel Ben Wright returned from his first deep space reconnaissance mission. He had spent months gathering intelligence on alien civilizations, and what he found terrified everyone who heard his report. Wright had discovered that the galaxy was not the peaceful place humans had hoped for. Instead, it was ruled by conquest and fear. Every species that had tried to remain independent had been crushed by the Council's war machine. The choice was always the same: submit or die, and most chose submission over extinction. What made it worse was that the Council had been watching Earth for decades. They knew exactly how advanced human technology was, and they were not impressed. When first contact finally happened, it would not be a meeting between equals. It would be a master meeting a new slave. The government's first reaction was panic. Earth's military was designed to fight other humans, not advanced alien civilizations. Their best ships and weapons would be useless against Council technology. If humanity wanted to survive, they needed to do something dramatic, and they needed to do it in secret. The Lazarus Protocol was born from desperation and genius in equal measure. The plan was simple in concept, but incredibly complex to execute. Earth would pretend to be weak while secretly building the largest military force in human history. When the Council finally made their move, humanity would be ready. Elena had been put in charge of the technical aspects of the project. Her job was to design and build shipyards that could construct entire fleets without being detected. The solution was to hide the construction facilities in places where alien sensors would never look. The asteroid belt became humanity's primary shipyard. Massive construction platforms were built inside hollowed-out asteroids and covered with rock to hide their heat signatures. The dark side of Earth's moon housed 3 complete fleet bases, along with training facilities for the crews who would operate them. Jupiter's moons provided additional construction sites along with testing, ranges for new weapons and equipment. Saturn's rings hid repair facilities and fuel depots that could support fleets for years without resupply. Even tiny Pluto was turned into a major military base disguised as a simple research station. Commander Rachel Kim handled the recruitment and training of personnel for the secret fleets. This was perhaps the most difficult part of the entire operation, because it required the cooperation of millions of people without revealing the true scope of the project. Military academies began accepting far more students than Earth's official fleet needed. The extras were told they were being trained for deep space exploration or asteroid mining operations. They learned how to operate warships, but thought they would be using their skills for peaceful purposes. Scientists and engineers were recruited through front companies that claimed to be working on civilian projects. A researcher might think they were designing better life support systems for space stations when they were actually creating the technology that would keep warship crews alive during long campaigns. The hardest part was keeping families from asking too many questions when their loved ones disappeared for months at a time. Cover stories about secret training missions and classified research projects could only work for so long before people began to suspect something larger was happening. Chief Engineer Tony Martinez solved many of the technical challenges that made the secret fleets possible. Human technology was inferior to Council systems, but it had advantages that the aliens had never considered. Human ships were smaller and faster, which made them harder to detect and target. Martinez also developed new weapons specifically designed to fight Council ships. Instead of trying to match alien firepower, humans focused on exploiting weaknesses. Council shields were powerful, but they required massive amounts of energy. Human weapons were designed to force those shields to drain their power rapidly. The cyber warfare capabilities that had proven so effective at New Boston were another Martinez innovation. Council computer systems were advanced, but they had never faced human hackers. The aliens assumed their technology was too sophisticated to be compromised by a primitive species. As the years passed, the scope of the Lazarus Protocol grew beyond anything the original planners had imagined. What started as a plan to build one secret fleet expanded into 10 complete armadas, each one capable of operating independently for years. Admiral Susan Clark commanded the Second Fleet from bases beyond Pluto. Her ship specialized in long-range operations and deep space combat. Admiral Frank Lopez led the Third Fleet from hidden facilities in the Alpha Centauri system. His forces were experts at rapid deployment and surprise attacks. Each fleet had its own specialty and area of responsibility. The Fourth Fleet under Admiral Chris Anderson focused on precision strikes against high-value targets. The Fifth Fleet, commanded by Admiral Jennifer Bell, was trained for electronic warfare and cyber operations. Every possible combat scenario had been planned for and prepared for. The deception required to hide such a massive operation was almost as impressive as the military buildup itself. Official Earth Defense Force budgets showed only enough funding for the ships everyone could see. The real money came from classified programs buried in civilian spending and private corporate research. Mining companies that claimed to be extracting resources from asteroids were actually building warships. Scientific research stations were really military training facilities. Even some of Earth's universities were secretly involved in developing weapons and defensive systems. Elena felt proud of what humanity had accomplished, but also sad that it had been necessary. The galaxy could have been a place of cooperation and peaceful exploration. Instead, it was ruled by fear and dominated by those who chose conquest over friendship. The most difficult part of the entire project was the psychological burden it placed on everyone involved. Millions of people had spent decades preparing for a war they hoped would never come. They had sacrificed normal lives and careers to build weapons they prayed would never be used. But now the war was here, and all their preparation was about to be tested. The Council thought they had defeated Earth's only fleet at New Boston. They had no idea that the real war was just beginning. 10 full armadas were moving toward Council space, and each one was commanded by officers who had spent 20 years training for this moment. Elena looked at the strategic displays showing fleet positions throughout the galaxy. The Council was gathering their forces for what they believed would be the final destruction of humanity. They were bringing together the largest invasion fleet in their history, confident that Earth could not possibly resist such overwhelming force. What the aliens did not know was that humanity had spent 2 decades studying their tactics and technology. Every Council weapon system had been analyzed. Every defensive strategy had been cataloged and countermeasures developed. The coming battle would not be between a primitive species and an advanced civilization. It would be between an empire that had grown complacent from centuries of easy victories and a species that had spent 20 years preparing for the fight of their lives. Kyle Morrison walked through the massive halls of the Galactic Council building and felt very small. The walls stretched up so high he could not see the ceiling, and everything was made of some kind of blue crystal that seemed to glow from inside. Strange symbols covered every surface, and he could not read any of them. The air smelled like metal and something sweet that made his nose itch. He wore his best diplomatic uniform, but it felt cheap compared to what he saw around him. Alien beings moved past him wearing robes that seemed to be made of liquid light, and jewelry that floated around their bodies without touching them. Some of the aliens were twice as tall as him, and others looked like they were made of living stone. Kyle had studied pictures of all the council races for months, but seeing them in person was different and scary. Lisa Kane walked beside him, and she looked just as uncomfortable as he felt. She was supposed to be Earth's military expert, but her uniform looked plain next to all the advanced technology around them. Her hand stayed close to her weapon, even though she knew it would be useless here. The aliens had shields that could stop anything humans had ever built. They followed a floating guide that looked like a ball of silver light. It spoke in perfect English, but the voice sounded like music played backwards. The guide told them about the great history of the Council and how they had brought peace to the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Kyle thought about what peace meant to these beings and felt cold inside. The council chamber was even bigger than the halls. 12 massive seats arranged in a circle around a small platform in the center. Each seat was designed for a different alien race, and some of them hurt to look at. The seat for the Kethmoran Empire seemed to be made of darkness itself, while the Zeftari representative sat on something that looked like frozen lightning. Kyle and Lisa took their places on the small platform. They had 2 simple chairs that looked like toys compared to the alien thrones around them. Kyle opened his briefcase and pulled out the trade agreements Earth had spent months preparing. They offered rare metals and scientific knowledge in exchange for basic technology and medicine. Chancellor Vexthera of the Kethmoran Empire spoke first. Her voice filled the entire chamber, even though she did not seem to raise it. She was tall and thin with skin that changed colors like oil on water. Her eyes were completely black, and when she looked at Kyle, he felt like she could see inside his mind. She said the council had reviewed Earth's proposal and found it amusing. The other council members made sounds that Kyle realized were laughter. The sound echoed off the crystal walls and seemed to go on forever. Kyle felt his face get hot, but he tried to stay calm. Vexthera stood up, and suddenly the air around the platform changed. Holographic images appeared showing hundreds of planets. Kyle recognized some of them from Earth's star charts, but many were completely unknown. The Chancellor explained that these were all the worlds the Council had conquered in the past 1,000 years. Each image showed the same story. A young race would try to negotiate with the Council and offer trade agreements just like Earth was doing. The Council would listen politely and then give them a choice: submit completely or be destroyed. Most races chose to submit and became slaves. The ones that chose to fight were wiped out completely. Kyle watched planet after planet burn in the holographic display. Entire civilizations turned to ash in a matter of days. The Council's war fleets were massive beyond anything he had imagined. Single ships that were larger than Earth's biggest cities. Weapons that could crack planets in half. Shields that had never been broken. The Chancellor explained that humanity had already been judged. They were young and weak and had nothing the Council wanted except their worlds and their labor. Earth had exactly 72 hours to begin evacuating. They're important people. The rest would become slaves or die. There would be no negotiation and no mercy. Kyle tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and said Earth would never surrender. Humanity would fight to defend their freedom. The laughter that followed was even louder than before. Some of the aliens were laughing so hard they seemed to be having trouble breathing. Vexithera showed them more images. These were of Earth itself, taken by Council spy ships. She knew exactly how many ships Earth had and where they were located. She knew about their weapons and their defenses. Compared to the Council's forces, Earth's military was like children playing with sticks. She told Kyle that humanity had built exactly 200 ships over the past 50 years. The Council had over 10,000 ships, and each one was more advanced than anything Earth had ever created. A single Council battleship could destroy Earth's entire fleet without taking damage. Lisa Kane finally spoke up. She said Earth's people would never give up without a fight. They had surprised enemies before, and they would do it again. The Chancellor looked at her like she was looking at an insect. She said the Council had heard those same words from 1,000 other species, and they were all either dead or in chains. Now, the meeting ended with the Chancellor giving them a data crystal. It contained the exact terms of Earth's surrender and the locations where evacuation ships should land. Kyle and Lisa had 72 hours to get the message to Earth and begin the process. After that, the Council war fleets would begin moving toward human space. As they walked back through the crystal halls, Kyle felt numb. Everything he had trained for and prepared for was useless. Earth was going to die, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Lisa walked beside him in silence, but he could see her mind working. She was already thinking about how to fight an impossible war. Their ship was small and plain compared to the alien vessels in the docking bay. Jake Sullivan met them at the airlock, and one look at their faces told him everything he needed to know. He had been monitoring Council communications and had heard rumors, but seeing Kyle and Lisa look so defeated made it real. The trip back to their diplomatic ship took only minutes, but it felt like hours. Kyle sat in the command chair and stared at the data crystal. Inside it was the death warrant for every human being alive. He had to send the message to Earth, but part of him wanted to throw the crystal out an airlock and pretend this had never happened. Finally, he activated the long-range communicator and waited for the connection to Earth. Admiral Patricia Wells appeared on the screen, looking tired. She had been waiting for this call and dreading it at the same time. Kyle told her everything that had happened in the Council chamber. He described the weapons and the ships and the complete confidence of the aliens. When he finished talking, there was silence for a long time. Admiral Wells looked older than Kyle remembered. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was steady and calm. She thanked Kyle for his report and told him to return to Earth immediately. Before ending the call, she gave an order that Kyle did not understand. She said to activate Protocol Lazarus and contact all fleets. Kyle had never heard of Protocol Lazarus, and he did not know what fleets she was talking about. Earth only had one fleet, and it was barely enough to defend the solar system. But something in the Admiral's voice made him think there might be more to this than he knew. As their ship headed back toward Earth, Kyle wondered if humanity had any secrets left to play. War Marshal Thekvar stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the human colony grow larger on the screen. New Boston was a small world with maybe 3 million people and a few basic defense platforms. Intelligence reports said the humans had moved most of their civilians away, but some stubborn ones remained. It did not matter because in a few hours there would be nothing left. His invasion fleet stretched out behind him like a metal mountain range in space, 800 ships. Of the Council's finest war vessels, each one the size of a small city. The smallest destroyer could level a human settlement with one shot. His flagship alone carried enough firepower to burn the surface of an entire planet. Thekvar had conquered 47 worlds in his career, and this would be the easiest. The humans had sent exactly one fleet to defend their colony. 200. Ships that looked like toys compared to his massive warships. He almost felt sorry for them, but the Council had made their decision, and he would carry it out. The human fleet was arranged in a defensive formation around the planet. Their ships were sleek and fast-looking, but they were so small that Thekvar wondered how they could carry enough weapons to be dangerous. His sensors showed that the largest human ship was barely 1/10 the size of his own vessel. A communication request came from the human fleet. Thekvar accepted it because he wanted to offer them one last chance to surrender. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to a middle-aged human male with gray hair and calm eyes. The name identifier said Admiral Richard Hayes. Hayes spoke. First, and his voice was steady. He said the human fleet would not allow the Council ships to approach New Boston. Any attempt to attack the colony would be met with force. Thekvar actually smiled when he heard this. The human was either very brave or very stupid. Thekvar explained to Hayes exactly what he was facing. 800 ships with weapons that could crack moons and shields that had never been penetrated. The Council had destroyed civilizations that were far more advanced than humanity. This was not a battle, it was an execution. Hayes listened without interrupting, and when Thekvar finished, the human admiral said something that surprised him. He thanked Thekvar for the information and said it would be very useful. Then he cut the communication, and Thekvar realized the humans were actually going to fight. The battle began when Hayes ordered his ships to attack. Thekvar expected the humans to charge forward and die quickly, but instead they scattered in all directions. Some ships dove toward the planet, while others climbed high above the battle plane. A few groups headed straight for the nearest asteroid field. Thekvar ordered his ships to pursue and destroy, but something strange happened. The human ships were faster than his intelligence reports had claimed. Much faster. They danced around his massive vessels like insects around giants. His gunners could not get a clear shot at targets that moved so quickly. Captain Amy Rodriguez commanded a squadron of 12 human fighters, and she led them through maneuvers that should have been impossible. Her ships used the gravity well of New Boston to slingshot around the planet at incredible speeds. They appeared behind Council ships, fired their weapons, and vanished before return fire could reach them. The human weapons were different too. Instead of trying to punch through the Council's heavy shields, they seemed to be designed to overload them. Multiple small hits in rapid succession that caused shield generators to overheat and fail. Once the shields were down, human ships would swarm the target and tear it apart with precision strikes. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker coordinated electronic warfare from his command ship. Human hackers had been studying Council technology for months, and they knew exactly which systems were vulnerable. Communication networks went down across the Council fleet. Targeting computers started giving false readings. Some ships even began firing on their own allies by mistake. Thekvar watched his battle plan fall apart as human tactics proved more effective than anyone had predicted. The humans were not trying to match the Council ship for ship. Instead, they were using speed and coordination to break up his formations and attack isolated targets. The asteroid field became a death trap for Council ships. Captain Maria Santos led a group of human vessels that had hidden among the rocks before the battle began. When Council ships pursued fleeing humans into the field, they found themselves surrounded. The humans used the asteroids as cover and weapons, pushing massive rocks into Council ships with precisely timed explosions. Hours passed, and Tekvar realized he was losing. Impossible as it seemed, his massive fleet was being destroyed by these small, fast human ships. The humans fought with a desperation and creativity that the Council had never encountered. They used every trick they could think of, and when those failed, they invented new ones. The turning point came when Santos realized her ship was too damaged to continue fighting. Instead of retreating, she aimed her vessel at the largest Council battleship in the area and pushed her engines to maximum power. Tekvar watched in horror as the human ship rammed into his ally's vessel at full speed. The explosion was massive, but what followed was worse. The ramming ship had been loaded with some kind of chain reaction device. The blast spread from ship to ship, destroying an entire Council battle group in a matter of minutes. Tekvar had never seen weapons that could cause that kind of cascading damage. More human ships began making ramming attacks. They would fight until they were too damaged to continue, and then turn themselves into guided missiles. Each sacrifice took out multiple Council vessels and hurt morale even more than the actual damage. Tekvar tried to reorganize his fleet, but the humans gave him no time. They attacked constantly from all directions, never letting his ships form proper defensive positions. His massive advantages in firepower and shielding meant nothing when he could not bring them to bear on targets. As the battle entered its 18th hour, Tekvar finally admitted defeat. His fleet had been reduced to less than half strength, while the humans still had over 100 ships in fighting condition. More importantly, his crews were exhausted and demoralized, while the humans seemed to be getting stronger as the fight continued. He gave the order to retreat and watched as his surviving ships limped away from New Boston. The humans did not pursue, which was probably wise. Both fleets had taken heavy damage, but the humans had clearly won. They had done something that no other species in galactic history had managed to do. They had defeated a Council invasion fleet. Trip back to Council space was the longest of Tekvar's life. He had to explain to the Chancellor how 800 ships had been beaten by 200. He had to describe weapons and tactics that made no sense according to everything the Council knew about warfare. Worse than the military defeat was what it meant for the Council's reputation. For 10,000 years they had been invincible. Every species in the galaxy knew that challenging the Council meant death. Now a young race had not only challenged them, but won. When Tekvar finally reached the Council homeworld, he found the leadership in emergency session. The other races that served the Council were asking questions. Some were even suggesting that maybe the humans were not as weak as everyone had thought. Chancellor Vexithara listened to his report in cold silence. When he finished, she asked how many human ships had escaped. Tekvar told her that most of the human fleet had survived and was probably being reinforced. The Chancellor's face showed no emotion, but her eyes were angry. She ordered the assembly of the largest invasion fleet in Council history. Every member race would contribute their best ships and crews. They would gather enough firepower to sterilize every human world in one coordinated attack. There would be no more chances for human tricks or tactics. As the meeting ended and plans began for massive retaliation, Tekvar noticed something on the long-range sensors that made his blood cold. The readings showed multiple large fleets moving through space toward Council territory. The energy signatures were human, but the size of the fleets made no sense. According to every intelligence report, Earth had only one fleet and most of it had just fought at New Boston. But the sensors were detecting 9 more fleets, each one as large as the force that had just defeated him. Either the sensors were wrong or humanity had been hiding the true size of their military. Thekvar checked the readings 3 times and ran full diagnostics on all equipment. The data was correct. 9 massive human fleets were approaching from different directions, and they were moving fast. Whatever secret Earth had been keeping was about to be revealed, and Thekvar had a feeling. The Council was not going to like what they found.